All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you may be watching this. Um, I'm so sad that we're not able to be together for this final lecture, but hopefully by watching this, kind of get one last hurrah before we head off to finals for next week. And as a reminder, finals are at 8 a.m. on Monday. Finals on 8 a.m. on Monday. And your final isn't due that day. It's due on the uh, next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. So again, we're meeting at 8 a.m. on Monday, and then your final and any late work that you have to turn in will be due next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. So just make sure to get your late work in and any of your assignments that you have due or need the test. So just make sure to get it in as soon as possible. And so, without any further ado, let's go through this last hurrah together, talking about redemption as the main theme of the Bible. And in order to understand that, there are a few things that we need to discuss before we understand redemption in the text. So let me go ahead and share this PowerPoint with you guys as we get rolling here today. So you guys will see um, same PowerPoint as we started on what is Wednesday. So you'll see the Acts there. Again, if you're needing this, it should be up on Moodle for week 15. You'll see it there without very many changes on there. So you will see a change when we get there, but that's because I deleted all the stuff we went over on Wednesday. And so you see the Acts there, Acts 1, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the various scriptures that belong to it. And again, I won't go over this too much because we went over it on Wednesday. But today we're really going to focus in on redemption as the main theme of the Bible. Redemption as the main theme of the Bible. And we have a couple of quotes here from Sandra Richter. It says, our objective as Christians is to understand the story of redemption, the Bible, and that if we are to understand the content of redemptive history, that is the story of Scripture that we've been looking at thus far, then we need to understand the culture through which it is communicated. And so there's going to be a few pieces here that we do need to understand. When we talk about the text and we talk about what's going on in the story of Scripture. And so as we do talk about these things, I do want to give a couple of examples as we talk about it. One of them are these cultural depictions of Jesus. And you'll see here on the next slide that there's a painting of Grunewald and Hagenau who created this Eisenheim altarpiece. And what's represented in this altarpiece on the cross, you'll notice that it's Jesus hanging on a cross. But if you pay a little more attention to his body, you'll notice these little specks and you'll notice his hands that have become crippled. And what was taking place at the time that the Black Plague was going around, and it affected these bodies to leave these scars and these welts and these marks on the bodies. And what it would do is that it would contort your hands and various limbs, and that's why you see Jesus' feet kind of warped that way in his hands, likewise doing some of the same things. This was a Jesus who was, again, reflective of the culture to which the Christians at the time were attempting to make sense of what sense or in what sense is Jesus on a cross, his suffering, what meaning lies there for us who are suffering with this plague? And you get to see this idea that Jesus, who bore our sickness or infirmities, who bore our sin on a cross, who likewise suffers alongside those who would suffer. And you see John the Baptist there with his little finger pointing out like that. You'll see Mary and John there on the other side. But again, that you see Jesus's body there at the bottom of Jesus being brought into this tomb, having been chewed up both by crucifixion and by this plague. That those who would be suffering in and with this plague don't go into death alone, but rather we have a God who goes before us into death, so that not even in death that we're alone. And so again, that this is part of the ways that Christians at the time both made sense of their own suffering and that interpreted the cross in that significant way to bring about a kind of redemptive element to Jesus's work despite the conditions of things that were going on. And so likewise, you'll see on the next slide, you'll see that this cultural depiction of Jesus. You may or may not be familiar with this scene, but this is a scene in which Jesus can no longer carry his cross because of the weight of him being brutally beaten he's lost his strength and can't carry his own cross, so he needs the help of a man named Simon of Cyrene. And so you'll see there Jesus, reflective of the culture in which Jesus is being depicted. This is by a Kenyan artist. And that you'll see these different elements of what's going on. Most specifically, if you take a look, the hand of this soldier that's on Jesus's back, and there's another soldier off in the background. Again, likewise, that the Jesus who suffers is identified in solidarity with those who suffer under the oppression during the Kenyan regime at the time. And so again, Jesus, who dies at the hands of the empire, the Romans, he dies as a criminal of the state. Likewise, is in solidarity with those who suffer at the hands of the state. Again, making sense of Jesus' suffering and the ways in which he brings redemption, redeems these narratives of suffering and cruelty, and does not just leave these people to suffer without meaning, without hope, and without redemption. And so again, the kind of solidarity that people find with Jesus' suffering. And it's important for us to recognize that as we're going through the story of Scripture, that we don't read it as God's canonizing a culture. And what I mean by that is that that the culture of the early Hebrews in the ancient Near East, that this is a vehicle that God chooses to use and employ and work through. And there's nothing morally superior, they're no culturally superior than any other culture, but rather this is the vehicle that God so decided to use. And so again, so that being said, that as we look at the Old Testament, that our study of it becomes a cross-cultural endeavor, understanding that first and foremost, that redemption is not a primarily theological term. It's a social term. It has social implications. And again, this word has social implications, and that's so important to recognize. That to redeem has everything to do with the social customs to which the Hebrews are a part. Now it's got three layers to it. It's patrilineal, it's patrilocal, and it's patriarchal. And so let's unpack a few of those things here. That it's patriarchal. It has everything to do with the centrality of the oldest living family member, male family member, in relationship to the larger society. So you can start thinking guys like Abraham, who again, head of his household, head of his tribe. You could think Isaac, again, when he's negotiating with Pharaoh. You could think Jacob when he's going down and again, looking for a wife and becomes head of the household over the 12 tribes. And then again, later on in the narrative, more specifically, someone like Moses, again, who becomes, again, the patriarch almost for all of Israel, that becomes kind of the shepherd of Israel at that point and becomes the representative for Israel. And then it's patrilineal, that the ancestral descent was traced through the male line. That's why you'll read, when you're reading genealogies, you'll see son of this person, son of this person, son of this person. Yeah, you'll see it again and again, because the way that heritage is traced through the male line, and that it's patrilocal. That the pattern in marriage, again, it's a social contract between two families in which the wife would settle into the husband's home. And that's why you have that phrase, in my father's house, there are many rooms. And a kind of bit of a fun fact is that at the time, what would happen is that the male, or the fiance, or the groom to be, they would get engaged. And what the male would do, he'd go to his parents' house. What he would build an addition to his father's house. He would go home, make a space for him and his wife to come home to. So after the wedding, they have a place that they're going to go home. And that likewise, that's what Jesus is tugging on, is that Jesus is going away to prepare a place for his bride, the church, in order to bring her back to his father's house. And so again, that Jesus plays off these themes that are familiar to the early readers of the text. And so that being said, that when we take a look at these different texts, it's going to be important for us to understand how redemption plays a part in these different texts. That you see with Ruth and Boaz, Ruth, who suffers the loss of her husband, and that there is no descendant once Ruth's father-in-law has passed away. And what happens is that it leaves Ruth and her family, and Naomi as well, in a very vulnerable position. That to be a woman without land, without inheritance, without work, somebody to work the land, that what happens is that there's a need for a family member to step into place in order to redeem, to bring a family member back from the brink of death, from the brink of hardship. That due to crippling circumstances of which Ruth finds herself, that there needs to be a rescue by a family member, and Boaz plays that part. That Boaz goes and he rescues Ruth from from these crippling circumstances, this death sentence. And it's not this kind of damsel in distress kind of deal, but it's one of the ways in which society provided a safety net for the most vulnerable. That again, this is one of the ways in which a society provided a safety net for the most vulnerable. So this has much less to do again with that damsel in distress, oh, woe is me, somebody save me, as much as it is a way to ensure that life would still thrive despite tragedy and despite crippling circumstances. And so Boaz functions as the kind of redeemer to ensure that life would continue. And likewise with Lot and Abraham. As some of you may be aware with the story that Lot's father dies, which is Abraham's brother. So Abraham brings him into his family. Abraham is now responsible for Lot. Until Lot goes and gets himself into trouble because he wants to go hang out in Sodom and Gomorrah, and wants to hang out on that side of town. And at this point, there's not much going on, but that territory ends up getting invaded and Lot gets taken captive. Abraham hears word about what's happened, and Abraham takes a crew of his boys and they go out there and they go and rescue Lot. That it's Abraham's responsibility to go out, put his own life on the line, and go out and bring Lot back home. That again, Abraham puts out his neck, puts his life on the line in order to bring Lot back home. That Abraham is responsible for Lot, so he has to go and bring him back. So this is yet another expression of redemption in Israel's culture. Again, we saw the first one where you have, safety from crippling circumstances, devastating circumstances. You have the second kind of theme that goes into it, of rescue from enemies, from oppressors that are threatening. And then we have this third form of redemption, which is to purchase one back into a home, into a family. And that's exactly what Hosea does. You have Hosea, who's the prophet that God calls him and tells him, like, hey, I need you to go and take a prostitute for a wife and bring her home. And what happens is that Hosea and Gomer's relationship ends up becoming this reflection of God's relationship with his own people. And what happens there is that Gomer ends up going back into prostitution, into slavery. And so what Hosea does, he has to go buy her back. And this happens 3 times. That Hosea pays a price, a ransom, to bring her back into his family, into his home. And this is also called redemption. And so again, that Israel's tribal society, the way redemption is described, again, in social terms, that when a member, the head of the household, puts their resources on the line to rescue a family member who's been driven to the margins of society by poverty or another unfortunate set of circumstances, to redeem or rescue from an enemy whom he's had no defense, and then one who's found themselves enslaved by the consequences of an unfaithful life and is rescued, redeemed from that life. And so redemption in these various forms are the ways in which a lost family member is brought back home, that they're restored back into a family. And so one of the questions that I want you guys to respond is to describe for me, how does this relate to the gospel narratives that we've been reading? How does this relate to the gospel that you understand about what has God done to bring us back into his family? What are some of the implications? What has God rescued, redeemed us from? What has he redeemed you from? And so again, to make the connection between the gospel narrative and your own life, to see what has God redeemed you from. So again, that's one of the questions that I want you guys to respond to. So again, open up a Word doc. Question number one, and I'll make sure to post this on Moodle for you guys to take a look at. And again, just to respond to this question, that how does this relate to the gospel narrative in the text as well as in your life? And so one of the things that these last things that I want to leave with you guys is a couple of texts from the New Testament that describe for us in no uncertain terms of what Jesus has redeemed, rescued us from. That in Colossians 1:13 and 14, it says, He has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So when we ask the question, what has Jesus redeemed us from? One of the answers that we can respond to is the fact that Jesus has redeemed us from sin. That again, he's brought us not just he's just taken us from a place to just leave us abandoned somewhere, but rather he's brought us into a kingdom, into a family, which means the forgiveness of sins, those wrongdoings that separated us from the Father. He's now made a way for us to be brought back in. And this last text in 1 Peter 1:18 and 19, that he says, You know that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your ancestors, not with perishable things like silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without defect or blemish. And brothers and sisters, know this, that the price paid for you to be redeemed, paid for you to be brought back home, brought into this family, is of all in no monetary worth. Much more precious, as Peter says, than stuff like silver and gold, dollars and cents. That in an age when we wonder what's our worth, what's our value, and even if it's something that you don't struggle with, but just to know for certain that your worth cost somebody their life, and that person is Jesus. And to know that there was a price paid for you to be brought back home, for you to belong to a family, for you to have a place to belong to have brothers and sisters, not just for the next few days, few months, few years, but throughout eternity, to have this family that you belong to. That you have a place to call home, even in the set of particular circumstances. And I know for some of us, home is a difficult place to think of, or to even talk about family dynamics. I'm somebody that comes from a broken home. Again, dad bounced when I was 8, and he tried to come back for a few months when I was 18. That didn't work out either. Mom was often gone a lot because she was working a lot, and I was left oftentimes with my grandparents. And so to talk about family is very difficult for me to think of people as father figures. I mean, relationships with siblings are fine, but again, to conceive of a family in positive terms for me, it's taken a long time and still something I'm working through. That to have, I have deep trust issues because, again, because of the ways in which the person that I thought was supposed to protect us and be there for us ended up abusing us, and that was my dad. And I would suspect that a lot of you might be in the same position. And if not a lot of you, maybe just some of you. That you're coming from family backgrounds that it's a mess. That whether you have both parents in the home, no parents in the home, that to talk about family is very difficult, but this is the beauty of the church. This is the beauty of being a part of the family of God. And that we get to reassess and reflect on the imperfections of the past while being able to hold on to this new thing that, and to look forward to this new thing that God has done in Jesus. And to know for certain for ourselves and the communities to which we're a part that you're loved, that you're cared for, that you belong, and that the price that was paid for you, it can be put on a check, no matter how many zeros you put behind that one or that two, three, whatever number you want to put it. But if you're in a, if well, for one, if you're without a community right now, I strongly encourage you to to be a part of a church. And if you're needing one, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to get you plugged in with one. Um, and the other thing is, if you find yourself really struggling with your church, just to find one or two or three other people to connect with and to be able to learn trust and these kind of family dynamics, to have people to not only to love but to be loved in return. And I know that sounds romantic and super cheesy, but that's the only way to make it. That's why the Bible so consistently talks about the need to love one another, because it's not just for an idealistic, romantic kind of just picture view of the future, but rather the meat, the potatoes, the heart and soul of how we are going to make it for the long haul. That there is something hellish about suffering alone, and that God's provided so much to the family around us in the church and brothers and sisters around us that we don't have to go through all of this alone. So again, if that's something you're struggling with, please reach out, whether to me or other classmates or friends, that you wouldn't struggle with this alone, because again, God's redeemed you. He's brought you into this. And so now it's in with the by the power of the Holy Spirit, part of our responsibility to learn these new habits of what does it mean to be a redeemed people. And so that's for discipleship. If you're taking the next semester, absolutely wonderful. Um, and it's it's what it means to be God's people. That's why we get to learn this story, so we can get to know the nature and character of God, knowing that God doesn't change, and knowing that God's love and his faithfulness never fail, even as we struggle with being faithful. And so learning the story is everything. Because as we learn the story, we learn about the God who's the main character of this entire thing, and that we get to know for ourselves not just who are we, but who are we in light of this thing that God has done for us, to us, in us, around us. And so again, this is something we're struggling with. I encourage you to reach out as soon as you can. I know the finals are coming around with a lot of things coming up, and there's a lot of stuff that is just going on right now. So I want to encourage you guys to do so. But yeah, this is it for lecture. I said it was going to be short and sweet. Um, I'll post a second question on the page for you guys to answer, and it's more reflective for you guys just to think about and to answer. So again, post your answers to the Dropbox, which is on Moodle week 15. And again, as a reminder, that our final is next Monday at 8 a.m. 8 a.m. on Monday is our final, and your final storyboard project is due on next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. So do get it in earlier than that, for your own sanity's sake. That way you're not up till the middle of the night, and you can start winter break a little earlier. So I love you guys. This semester has been absolutely incredible. I know it's been difficult for us. It's been a huge challenge, but I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so proud of each and every one of you that have fought through the difficulty, that I've put forth your best. This is building character. And I know it hurts, but we grow through these kinds of things. I know I'm growing through this and learning how to navigate all this. And so I just want to say how so incredibly and stinking proud I am of each and every one of you, to have gotten to know you, to have gotten to learn alongside you, and to have gotten just to see a glimpse of your brilliance. I know God has great things for each and every one of you, if we so choose to stick the course. And speaking as somebody who's a follower of Jesus for 15 years, I know it's not a lot, but um, it's hard. It's hard, but it's always worth it. And anything that's difficult or anything that's worth it usually has some element of difficulties to it. So, um, again, I'm proud of you guys. I love you guys. If you guys need anything, please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions, email me. Again, Storyboard Project. If you guys have any questions, please connect with me. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon. See ya.